okay? Last thing we want to do is discourage people in their Bible study. And I know this, that how many of you have tried to read the Bible through in a year? How many of you have succeeded in reading the Bible through in a year? Fewer hands than raised to start with, right? And what happens is we set up ourselves to read 5 chapters a day. We miss a day. Now we're 5 chapters behind. And then we're trying to catch up. And then we're 10 chapters behind, and then we're just daggone discouraged. So we don't read at all, right? And so that's not the purpose of this study, okay? Take as much time as you need. You're going to have the books until you lose them. Or your kid gets a hold of them, or your dog. So take as much time as you need. Go back, just do one of those lessons. Try to do one of the 5 lessons. If you're not going to do all 5, try to do at least one between now and next Wednesday, okay? You'll be blessed by it. Even just rereading the story of Moses kind of opened my eyes to a whole different panorama of his life. And the same thing with Elijah. And encouraged me. So I hope that you'll do that. Let's go ahead and play the video now, brother. Even open.
In our study together, you will hear me say over and over again that if you and I are going to read the Bible well, we have to understand the grand story of the Bible so that we can know and understand where we fit in that story. One of my favorite parts of Lord of the Rings is when Sam and Frodo are on their way to Mount Doom, and Sam says this, "I wonder if we shall ever be put into songs or tales. We're in one, of course, but I mean put into words, told by the fireside, or read out of a great big book with red and black letters years and years afterwards. And people will say, 'Let's hear about Frodo and the Ring.' And they'll say, 'Yes, that's one of my favorite stories. Frodo was very brave, wasn't he, Dad?' Yes, my boy, the famousest of hobbits, and that's saying a lot." I are also in a story. We are in the story that God is writing on this world. But we have to understand how we relate to earlier parts of the story. And with parts of the Old Testament, that can be a bit difficult. Many people have a hard time understanding how to read the law and the prophets, for instance. So what we're going to talk about today in this session is how do we read the law and the prophet well. We have been talking about how to read the Bible well, and you guys have done great thus far. It's been so good to be with you. I want to ask you a question. When you have read through the Bible, where do you normally get bogged down?
Leviticus.
Leviticus. Okay. Yeah, that tends to be the place where the wheels start coming off. Well, we want to talk in this session about reading 2 of the most difficult parts of the Old Testament, the law and the prophets, and we're going to take them one at a time. So let's talk first of all about how to read the law. Number 1, we're going to ask, where does the law fit in the story? And how does it relate to God's covenant? Now, when we talk about the law of the Old Testament, we really need to understand how the law fits into the grand story of the Bible and how it relates to God's covenant especially. That's going to be very, very important for us to understand. So I want us to talk about the grand story, just real briefly, review the overview of this part of the Bible story so we can think about where the law fits in that developing story. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Now, the law fits in what I would call Act 2 of the story. And Act 2 is about God's covenant people. I want you to think about how the story develops, beginning with Genesis chapter 12. In scene 1, you have God calls a covenant people. God calls a covenant people, and He uses a very important person in the Old Testament story to do that. Does anybody remember who I might be talking about? Abraham. Abraham is the father of the Jewish people, the father of the covenant people. And so God comes to Abraham and initiates relationship with Abraham. Because the way God is going to deal with the problem of sin in the world is He's going to deal with it through relationship. He's going to deal with it through establishing a covenant people. Listen to this passage from Genesis 12, 2 and 3. God says, I will make you into a great nation, speaking to Abraham. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who treat you with contempt. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Now think about this. We've seen the earth permeated with sinful people. And now God is bringing in a plan through a covenant people to turn that curse of sin into a blessing in some way. God is going to make Abraham into a great nation. But what's the problem? Abraham's really old. He is past really the time in life when he would normally be having children. His wife is past that time. But God says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a son. The son of the promise is Isaac. Isaac is the son of the promise. So in Genesis 21, we have Isaac born. But a crisis comes into the story. God tests Abraham by what in Jewish theology is called the binding of Isaac. That's the time when God says, I want you to sacrifice your son, your only son. And so they go up, and you know the story. God steps in the situation and affirms Abraham's faith. This is a really important part of the story because this relationship with God that is being worked out has a foundation of faith or trust. The fact that Abraham trusted God in the situation. In fact, when Hebrews is commenting on this story,